Hello. Welcome to Jordan Sorcery's GW Books Club. This month, we're reading Konrad by David Farring. This is the first book in a trilogy of stories set in the Warhammer fantasy world. It's the start of an epic tale of fate and fear as the forces of chaos seek out a seemingly innocent young boy in the backwaters of the Empire. My friend Stu and I will be talking about the characters, the story, what we liked, what we didn't, and whether or not this feels like a Warhammer story to us. Before we get into it though, let's quickly go through the events of Konrad by David Farring. In an uncared for village amongst the forests of the Empire, a young slave boy has the daily task of collecting firewood for his brutish master, finding only beatings and a bed of hay with the animals as reward for his work. One day, his miraculous second sight gives him the opportunity to save a passing rider from certain death at the hands of a renegade mutant emerging from the woods. The rider is Elissa, daughter of the richest man in the town, and over the coming years the two become friends and at times more, with Elissa even giving the boy his name, Konrad. Elissa exhibits miraculous powers of her own, and although she gives Konrad gifts, like an exquisite bow and arrows from her father's cellar, she can also be distant and confusing to the boy. After the pair encounter a knight clad in bronze armour scouting the village, Elissa convinces Konrad to flee, and on Sigmar's holy day, he does so. But before he can get far, the growing mass of beastmen renegades in the woods forces him to don a disguise and return with them to the village he had just quit. The village is destroyed, a massacre from which none survive. And before he makes good his escape, Konrad finds no evidence that Elissa lived. He also encounters a man emerging from the flames of Elissa's manor house, unharmed by either fire or Konrad's arrows. Sometime later, Konrad is taken under the wing of a soldier of fortune called Wolf, and he accompanies him to his new station as the man in charge of securing a valuable Kislevite mine on the very edges of the northern wastes. Konrad spends 5 long years learning the art of combat from the many sellswords who defend the mine, and in a final quest before he claims his freedom, Konrad must put those skills to the test against an army of goblins that would sacrifice the kidnapped wolf in a dark ritual. Stu, so we've read Konrad. What did you think of it?
I really enjoyed it, actually. It was after the last one, there was a point where it was a bit of a slog, but this was a really easy read, which is good because I did leave it quite late. At a point of recording, I think I read 3/4 of it yesterday evening, but it was an easy read and enough there. It was enjoyable enough to keep those pages turning without it being painful at all. I quite enjoyed it. So overall, very enjoyed it, definitely.
Yeah, I had a sort of similar reaction to it as well. It's relatively simple overall. It's quite a linear story, but it did keep me engaged, and there's enough mysteries, and there's like lots of little threads that sort of flow through this book and clearly are going to go further, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
I hope so. There's a lot of setup.
Yeah, there's loads of setup. But then also the actual tale of Konrad himself and sort of how he's growing up and how he's learning his skills and becoming the man that's going to go and have some big destiny, presumably. It was compelling enough that it kept me wanting to come back and find out what was happening next.
Yeah, I think so. That first third was quite fairly slow pace, I suppose. And in the context of it being maybe one story, and we'll come back to that maybe later. We don't know because we've not read the other 2 books yet, but then the pace of it is probably fine. But in terms of the context of just the single book, the first third does feel quite slow, but I enjoyed it all the same. And it did have a kind of a feel of almost an 80s fantasy film, that first third as well. Very kind of cheesy sort of setup. Probably Willow if Willow was a 15 rather than a PG. It kind of feel to it. It's got that kind of aiming for the teen market, the 14 to 18 market. But I liked it. I think it was quite well written at times as well. It's quite nicely written. I quite like the interplay between the main characters. There was a bit of banter there, wasn't there, to use a more modern term. But it's quite charming in the way it was done. It felt natural. It didn't feel like it was someone writing about teenagers and not getting them at all. There were believable elements to it. The only thing I suppose I didn't like about the first third or so, and I don't know if you picked up on this as well, is that I know he's sheltered, but his view and his knowledge of the world seemed a little bit too limited, maybe, for someone who lived in an inn, which would obviously see people passing through. And to not have even heard of the Empire seems a little bit of a stretch at times. It didn't spoil the story, but I think they pushed that kind of almost dumb country boy to the point where it was pushed too far, considering I know it's a small village, but he still lived in a village where other people around him seemed to be aware. And just because he wasn't educated formally and was helping out at an inn, he was helping out in an inn, not on a farm on the outskirts. He was still fairly central, I suppose, but very minor thing.
That's a good point. That hadn't occurred to me, actually. And now that you mention it, that's definitely fair. I suppose you might be able to retroactively sort of explain it away as he just doesn't care because he is so insular. So even if he did get exposed to any of it, none of it's sunk in because his world is just, he gets up, he walks out and collects the kindling. He comes back, he gets beaten by this slave master tavern owner, and then he goes to bed in the hay with the animals. And that's like his entire life.
So that's a good point, actually. And I bet you, if I asked my wife what was the main headline, the news today, she wouldn't know because she just doesn't, her world isn't following that kind of thing. So maybe that's, though she does know where we live, hopefully. She's heard of the Empire. She won't be able to find her way back. But she does understand the concept of country. But yeah, I know what you mean. And maybe you're right there, actually. Maybe his life is just focused so differently that it's very much that village. And we've seen that in other books, haven't we? With Pold's, I've got the name of the rest of the title of the short story, but how he'd never been out of his own town before. In Pold's, what's the short story in it was Pold's circus book.
Yes. Okay. Sure. Yeah, you know what? I've forgotten the name of it as well.
But yeah, he'd never been out of his town either.
It was his first journey. Yeah,
in a medieval-esque town, then or village, then maybe you are a little bit more insular than you would be living in a local village.
Maybe not testament to the quality of that particular story, and that neither of us can remember what it's called.
They don't compare in that sense. This is a different world and a whole lot better.
Yeah. But the first third, as you say, because there's an interesting structure to this book, which we'll talk about as well. But that first third, it's very much about him. He is living in this sort of terrible life, really, in that he is a slave and he's beaten and he's sort of treated really badly. He's kind of got a mysterious past a little bit. It's how he came to be in the possession of the tavern owner and what the real nature of this village is. But then he meets Elissa, this young girl from the fancy manor house and the village headman or the sort of the richest person in the village. And she, surprisingly, is out for a ride early morning. And then the two of them meet because he has this ability, this second sight, to sense danger. And he senses that she's going to be attacked by a beast man.
Yes. Yeah, I quite like the way that's set up. It gives you the idea that there's more to him, especially with him being dumb or very limited speech. And that expands throughout the book, but his speech is very stilted early on. And I think that's done relatively well. But without that element to it, it'd be easy to see the character maybe as simple, and he's clearly not simple. He's just uneducated. And I think quite early on, you get the impression that he's actually quite intelligent in his own way, and there's quite a lot of depth there. And I think that's considering it's such an easy book to read. I think that's probably done with some good writing skill to manage to get that across in what is a relatively simple book. But I think the character was just there. It seemed to work. That's something what we still don't know the answer for in the second or third parts of the book, really. And I'd say split it into thirds. It feels like it's 3 books, even though it's a small, as in books within a story. They're not. It's not laid out like that. They're just standard chapters. But it does feel like there's 3 pretty distinct parts of the story. But that was quite. It was placed there fairly early on. That gives you the idea of depth and leaves you. Well, there's lots placed, isn't there? There's lots of little kind of things that we don't think we've had any of them pay off yet.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, like you say, this is. I mean, they announced that this was the first in a trilogy of books before it even came out. So it was already known there was going to be 3 books in this series. And within this one book, like you say, there's almost a trilogy. The acts that we're talking about are quite distinct. You get very different sort of version of the character, the Konrad character, in each of those, because this is his origin. And in the first third here, we've got the origin of his origin story, if you like, in this village.
Yes.
And his relationship with Alyssa. Which, you sort of mentioned before about how that relationship plays out, and I think it is a really interesting one because it does feel more complex, and it does feel like someone who's taken the time to kind of imagine more thoroughly, I suppose, the dynamics of a relationship between these 2 characters. They don't just fall in love and then, they're having this sort of romantic tale. They're not caught out by her father and the sort of authorities. It plays out in a very unexpected way to me, I think.
Yeah, that would have been the almost the easy route, the stereotypical route. You think, oh, this is it. But they start as, I suppose, maybe starting them as 12-year-olds rather than as teens as well. There's that temptation would have been for them to have some kind of love affair to start with. By starting them as 12-year-olds, you almost start as friends exploring this almost a forbidden friendship, isn't it? The difference between classes and that kind of. They both have to keep it secrets for their own reasons. Him because he will be beaten and he's not doing his jobs, and her because her family and her father would disapprove. So I think because it starts from that point, we don't reach the romantic part towards quite close to the breaking of that relationship, so it doesn't dominate it. So again, whether how deliberate that was to avoid that, I'm not sure, but it worked, and there was enough that little bit of titillating stuff, literally, for the 14-year-olds in the 1990s. But it was just a little, and it wasn't enough to make it too gratuitous or kind of spoil the story.
Sensitively written, isn't it? That the way the relationship goes, and because they aren't just. They have a deep connection, but it isn't just like pure lust. There's obviously more of a relationship there, and also the way that she treats Konrad is really interesting. So she gives Konrad his name and she gives him gifts and things like that, but she's not always around. Neither of them are sort of. He's a bit more besotted, I suppose, but it's not like this is an all-consuming relationship. So she's got her own secrets and she's obviously doing her own stuff, and we don't really know the full picture of what she's been up to because there's a couple of mysteries around her. But you do get this sense that it is a meaningful relationship, but it's complicated. And I quite liked that. That kind of gave it a lot more texture than something that was too clear and easy, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the story is very deliberately written from his point of view all the way through. Some stories you'll find that they switch between different characters' perspectives, but we don't really see other characters' perspectives at all. The only time we see other characters is when they're in a scene with him, so always through his perspective. So things are a little bit a secret. So and that I suppose helps build towards all the unknown and all the questions that are left unanswered, just because we don't know what's going on. We don't know what happens when she goes home. Is there a dark secret there? There was a part in it when they talk about them saving each other, which is quite interesting. But by him saving her life, she probably changed him in a way by giving him the bow and all of those things, and giving him a name and getting him to speak. Maybe changed him to the point where he was able to grow up and then leave. Maybe that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't saved her.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So they almost she created him, I'd say. We don't know enough about her her side of the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, and
to
literally
work
so
that
in one
out.
sense, right? Because she gives him the name. She creates Konrad, who Konrad is, as opposed to the sort of the slave boy, the mute slave boy who he was before. Now he is someone who had those capabilities originally, but now he's going to put them to the use of saving himself and going off into the world and doing all sort of stuff. But you mentioned the bow there that she gives to him, and this is one of many Chekhov's guns or Chekhov's bows, if you want to frame it that way, in this book that are not resolved. So she took that bow and 10 arrows and a quiver from her father's basement, and she gave it to Konrad, and I quite liked it. He sort of used the arrows over the course of the next couple of years, and he sort of, because they matter so much, he kept track of each one and when it was
split
used.
them, didn't he? He had
Yeah,
5
absolutely,
in one place
yeah.
and 5 in another.
Because he really wanted to make sure he was getting the sort of value out of them. And that's because they're almost ornate, they're really well fashioned and well made. And there's also an emblem on the quiver that is made mention of several times.
Yes.
I can only assume is going to be meaningful at some point in the
future. Hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Same with the mention it's black, isn't it? So the wood is black. When he broke the bow, it was black all the way through. And didn't he bury it when he broke it? And then it was disturbed by animals where he buried it, but it wasn't.
Sure, yeah, there was
afterwards.
a little something about.
So that broken bow's gone. So again, that's set up to maybe it makes a return at the point of.
I feel like
later on,
who we'll talk about soon enough, also recognize the emblem. I feel so.
He doesn't like bows.
No, and he doesn't like bows. But there's this hint that there's a greater sort of history to the bows. And then the other big mystery, I think, with Alyssa is that she herself has some magical abilities. So she can heal him, but she's also seen. I don't know if you got this feeling, but she's quite keen for him to not be present on Sigmar's holy day, which it turns out is the day that the sort of renegades, the mutants, and the chaos beastmen attack the village. And she really doesn't want him to be there. She really doesn't want him to be in the temple of Sigmar. And that saves his life. Is that because she knows the attack is coming? And do her powers have some relationship with chaos in some way? Those are the questions I was left with about her.
You'd hope that was probably, well, I think she must know whether she's got the relationship with it or whether she's aware of something. Maybe it's her father that does. We don't know whether she's a good or bad actor yet, I suppose. I think she's either bad or knows of, has connections with the bad side, and isn't all bad. It's hard to know that well, it could go either way, couldn't it? And people who have read them all will know, and they'll be laughing at us for kind of debating something that's such an old story. But that's good, and that shows how the strength of the story is that we're here and we're interested, and I'm excited to find out what goes, because we don't know. It's not so straightforward. You can't just guess straight away. You can guess whether things are going to make a return and things that are important, but sometimes it's pretty easy to kind of guess the plot, isn't it? And it's not telegraphed in a way that it's straightforward.
No,
because we just didn't meet her. We never met her father. We didn't meet those other characters, so it's harder to if there were scenes from her perspective when she was talking to her parents and within her life away from meeting Konrad in the woods, then we might have had a better idea, but I'm sure that was done deliberately, so we don't know. So it's very interesting.
No, and there's also the extra sort of confounding factors of so with this second sight ability, Konrad is also shown a mirror by Alyssa, and in that he sees a future version of himself. So, and we don't know when that is. We don't know if we catch up with that version of himself at the end of this book, or if that's going to be.
I think it mentioned grey, didn't it? Or grey.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, they certainly seemed
imagine would be
significantly older. Yeah, and then he also had a vision, or two visions, really, of Alyssa. One where she is betraying him, and one where she is dead. And he's sort of, he can't understand how they can both be visions of the future because they are so contradictory. Which I think is an interesting setup. I quite like.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine both things could be true, and
They
maybe
could
he could
be.
be
I
the
think she
reason why
was
she's dead
older.
after she's betrayed him.
I think she was older in the vision where she betrays him. I think
I
that's where the
see. So
conflict
maybe
comes from.
there
Because
are two paths.
yeah, exactly, and that's the sense. Is it two paths? We think so. After this attack that happens on the village, we think she's dead, but we're not able to confirm that. Conrad can't confirm that. So she might still be alive. She might
Yeah.
still betray him or have already betrayed him. We don't know for sure. And is
Maybe
it
it's like the
possible?
Mirror of Galadriel. I don't know if you're not a reader of Lord of the Rings,
I'm
but
not.
you've
No.
seen the film, so you know that the way that the idea of that it shows things that have happened or some things that might not yet to pass. So it's that kind of
Exactly. Yeah. So is it?
idea of that it's slightly
Yeah.
misleading. The things that could happen,
Yeah.
and maybe the mirror of Alyssa, which she fixed after he threw and broke, which was
Yeah. Exactly. She used magic to fix it, right? So
so
does that
not
even?
just healing humans, she was
Yeah.
able to completely fix a broken mirror, which was
Yeah.
interesting.
And I think because part of me wondered if is the vision of her dead actually a vision of what he's going to think in the future? So the version of her that's dead in the vision is her from that at that age, at that time. So he is almost seeing something that didn't happen, but that will happen through his imagination. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But,
no, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
so it could be that they're both true, but they're sort of true in different ways, which I like that as a setup for a little bit of a mystery as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But then
it was.
yeah, I mean the attack on the village, I think, is when things really kicked into gear.
It changes pace, doesn't it?
It really
and
does. Yeah,
in a good way as well.
Yeah.
And that's probably my favorite part of favorite part of the book is that middle third. And I think that it was good because of the slow time that was taken to build up the characters in the first place. I think if that was a chapter, he could have easily done it almost as a chapter, that first third, or two chapters maybe, and then gone straight in. And maybe other books we've read would have done that. But I really enjoyed that kind of next third, and because he was about to leave, wasn't he? He was thinking of leaving, and they kind of parted, said their goodbyes, and didn't intend to see each other again. He was about to leave, but then when he saw the attack, and it's very well described. I'm going to use another Lord of the Rings sort of vision, but it reminded me a little bit of Ammon Hen, and you can see all the Uruks running through the woods down towards the water, and he just had that feeling of as he sees all of these beastmen, as he calls them, but they're obviously a mix of beastmen and chaos spawn and orcs and goblins and things. But you do get some real jeopardy there, and you do feel that kind of pace, almost like there's a drum beat in the background of that kind of
for sure, and even
like a war drum going on. And
very much
like,
so.
These people are screwed. To be honest with you, they're not going to be able to protect themselves. And then you get the real gross scene where he wears someone's skin.
I mean, because even before that attack, and I agree, that attack has a real it is like a flood flowing down the sort of hillside into the village, and it's very like there's no way to withstand this.
It's not comic book, and I know it's not comic book in the way of Gotrek and Felix when they're killing mutants, and it's almost just like they're easily overpowering them, and it feels more horror-like and more
very
jeopardy,
quite horrible.
It's a slightly different tone to it.
Yeah, and some of that comes from the sort of really tense scenes that occurred earlier before the attack and the night before, because he's, like you said, he was making his way out of the village. He's going through the forest, he's leaving, and then he seeks shelter in the sort of bough of a tree, and then all of these chaos renegades, all these beastmen start to gather around, and they don't notice him, but he's just sort of in this tree, and then he thinks he's behind the battle line, so that's when he comes out of the tree and he sort of makes his way off. And then he encounters a really well described, and the art in the book is really, really good for this. The face of a beastman that's upside down, and it's just very strange. And he has to fight it, and then he skins it and uses it as a disguise.
Yeah, I didn't see that bit coming.
No, I did not either.
I was kind of like, oh, okay.
And it's very quick work from Konrad, very effective work that he's able to do it. But then I quite like that he bumps into some Skaven. And they're like, no, you're definitely not leaving. You have got to be involved in the fight.
Yeah, the Skaven. I did think of you when the Skaven turned up. They're quite a rarity in these books, aren't they? And it's quite, when they do turn up, or sometimes there's false Skaven. I'd say you think, oh, are they Skaven now? They're just a giant rat. Whereas these were like, as soon as they said they were giant rats, but then they were talking, and it was like, oh, they're Skaven. They're Skaven. But it's great. They kind of prod him in the back all the way down into the valley, and he gets caught up in the whole thing.
Yeah,
and then it's bizarre. It's quite bizarre. The writing of it is very good, but you get this idea of their chaos, but the chaotic nature of the different groups and what they're doing, and the burning of the chapel, and the people screaming and dying, and the football Blood Bowl game that's going on with a head which is quite strange.
It is. I quite like this though, because this is a version of chaos. Again, we're still in those earlier days when chaos isn't quite as sort of clean and ordered as it is now. So you did have chaos, a version of chaos where it would be chaos orcs and chaos ratmen and chaos beastmen, and those beastmen wouldn't all be the same kind of goat-headed guys. They would be all sorts of weird and wonderful and horrific shapes and sizes. But they're all just, because it's chaotic. It's like literal the stuff of chaos. They are very strange, and they behave strangely, and they look strange. And I really like that. That's a version of chaos that appeals to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite impressive. And there's also tied into this, before the attack, there had been a single, what seems to be maybe a chaos warrior had ridden into the village to sort of do some reconnaissance. So even that is a mystery. We don't know the full story there either. But I love the idea of a chaos warband or a chaos army that is one chaos knight, and everything else is just a weird monster man.
We were talking about this at the weekend, weren't we? Before we did, and it's exactly what you described. So it's an army you're going to build later, but
I'd love to
not paint, but you're going to build it. But yeah, you're right, and it's and again, it shows the different pacing at different chapters of this book, because that chapter was still, wasn't there? It was the daytime, but no one else appeared in that village at the time. Only they seemed to be there to see him, and they were kind of half hiding, but Lisa went out to speak to him, and he dragged her back. But you can almost sense the kind of the silence and just the slow plodding of this, I'm guessing, massive horse with this scary looking warrior on it. And it's again very, very good visually. You could picture it very, very clearly as well, very well written in that sense. So again, you know it's chaos, you know that it's building to something, you know that this character will be important at some point. We don't know yet, because again, this is another something that's yet to pay off. Answers that maybe you expect to find in the last third of the book aren't quite as forthcoming as I expected them to be, but equally very, very good. At this stage of this book is just really, really, I was quite gripped at this stage, which is good, because I was on a deadline. But it's in terms of finishing it, which is, it's always good when you're enjoying it and you don't have to force yourself to read quickly. But the pacing was really, really good. It was the odd little bit that kind of there's very few bits that drew me out of the book. There was the odd little line that stuck out when some creature comes out and drinks the brains from the split head that was the football for Blood Bowl, and he screams, "Ah!" as in Konrad does. And I just thought it just felt completely out of I don't know why I remembered it now, but it just took me out a little bit. Why would he say that? But most of it was just incredibly well written, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And there was at least one more mystery, was that during this chaos attack, Konrad goes to check the manor to see if Alyssa's still alive. Everything in the village is burning down, including the manor, and from it emerges this skull-faced guy who is not injured by the flames. Konrad fires a bow, an arrow at him. That doesn't injure him either. And then Konrad just he basically escapes at that point. The right call for sure. We've got no idea. It's not revealed in this book, this volume, who that was or what their deal was, what they were doing. I hope that is something else that gets resolved in a future.
I imagine it will be. So maybe it's the warrior without the armor.
Yes, that was my thought as well, but there's no real evidence for that, I don't think.
No,
We don't see any armor. We don't see anything that sort of
maybe,
ties them together.
Maybe some kind of chaos sorcerer that's linked with the warrior, I imagine.
Yeah, or was it Alyssa's father? Part of me even thought, is it Alyssa herself in some other form because she's been doing all of these magics? It feels like there's definitely another shoe to drop, as it were. But yeah, that was the kind of first act, and then we sort of go into a shorter act, I would say, where Konrad then makes his way to the nearest village, and he gets arrested for poaching. There's quite a good scene with a couple of the sort of guards or the henchmen sort of characters. They betray him. They sort of act like friends, and then they betray him to the Baron. But he's saved by the introduction of this new character, Wolf, who challenges the Baron on his behalf, and then organizes a duel and is able to kill the Baron. And now Konrad is free and offered the chance to come and live with Wolf for 5 years.
Be his squire. So
yes, basically, yeah. So how did you feel about Wolf's introduction and all of the sort of stuff that led up to it?
I really like the conversation and all the characters at that point. I think it's really quite interesting. Wolf's quite an interesting character. The dialogue wasn't always typical, I suppose. There's quite a lot of humor in there and tongue in cheek, and the way Otto, the Baron for Furlangen, was it? I think the village, the slightly larger town was called, was described as quite funny as well. And Otto's sister was. It's just the way those characters are written. They're very shallow characters, but there was a very visual image of way they were and their kind of personalities, and those few lines, just by the few things they said, gave you an idea of their character straight away, in almost the way a film would, because you can picture it in a film as well, but you get an idea of sometimes characters that come along and have a few lines in a book. You don't really know what their motivations are, but they seem pretty straightforward. And I really enjoyed those few scenes as well. I think they were quite well done, and very much still really enjoying the book at that stage. It's quite interesting. You feel like meeting Wolf is what he needed as a character to grow into the next stage, because I didn't know where it was going at that point, especially when he'd escaped and he was in the water and he was kind of on his own. You thought, well, this could go anyway. Now who knows what's going to happen. But as soon as you meet Wolf as a character, you can start guessing. Then that's the first time you could start guessing the way the story's going to go. Oh yeah, he's going to be mentored and get trained up and all the other things, and that's what it turns out to be.
Yeah. I found myself sort of almost, despite myself, quite liking Wolf, because at first I thought, okay, he is pretty broadly drawn. I feel like we've seen this kind of character in a lot of other stuff since then, maybe before then as well. Is this going to be any fun? And then actually he was gruff and interesting, and the dialogue was written well enough for me to just enjoy him being there. He wasn't mean to Konrad. There's often you sort of see that kind of character trait come through in this sort of story and this kind of dynamic. He was very to the point, and he is not an amazing mentor in the sense of he still makes Konrad clean his blade and he still makes him do all of this work. He doesn't step in to save him immediately and things like that. But he also he doesn't beat him or treat him badly or call him names or anything. So he treats him a lot better than anything we've seen up to that point. And he also takes the time to educate him as well. He doesn't treat him as stupid.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that the lessons, you get the impression that the lessons he's giving are valuable and exactly what he needs at that point. Slightly harsh lessons at times, but he levels him up pretty quickly in the context of over 5 years. But initially, the first part of the journey, because obviously gone a long journey at that point up north to Kislev. You get the impression that he's looked after, even if he's not made rich by tagging along with Wolf. Yeah,
very much so. And I found myself initially, when Wolf was introduced, I was very surprised that this was a second character in the relatively small number of books that we've read from the GW books range. and a second character called Wolf.
Yeah,
Really surprised me.
I did find myself wondering, have I missed something? Is this the same wolf? But I don't think, but it can't be. It doesn't make any sense.
It cannot be. It's definitely not.
No, it's clearly not.
And I'm assuming the reason that they were like, okay, well, this guy also needs to be called Wolf is because he has a relationship with wolves, the actual pack of wolves out in the forests. They protect Wolf and Konrad. He also has sharpened teeth, and he has this sort of tattooed face, and he basically gives the impression that he got drunk and he decided to have it done. There's some stuff later on in the book that maybe hints at the idea that he might actually have. Is he a werewolf? Does he have lycanthropy?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
especially when he was first when he's rescued at the end, and I'm sure we'll come to that later. But when he's rescued, there's that moment where he looks slightly different, and his body shape looks different. But then that seems to fade and change again. So that could be something to do with that.
Yeah, because I actually missed that when I first read it, but on the Patreon discussion, it was pointed out to me, oh wait, you've missed something here. So I went back and reread it, and it plain as day. I don't know why it just flew straight past me.
But it's a couple of words. Sometimes you miss them, and it doesn't change the whole story. But
yeah, and it does. It does speak to. He probably is a werewolf, and he probably has some sort of special powers because I've got the actual quote. He looked different somehow. His body deformed. Perhaps it was twisted with pain, which was why his limbs appeared misshapen. Yet his face has also taken on a strange aspect, as if his jaw were elongated. And although his flesh was soaked with blood, it also seemed matted with thick hairs. So it's basically 100% he's a werewolf.
He's a werewolf, yeah. If you skim past that line, he's a different perspective.
But yeah, he definitely has. So, because he also has a hatred of the bow, he has a hatred of wizards and magical powers. There's obviously something more to Wolf's story that I think is going to be interesting. I hope we're also going to see more of. But yeah, it's a character I enjoy. Yeah,
they kind of. I in terms of the name appearing twice in the series without sort of chucking too many stones at the editing, we've already discovered that there was some probably things that maybe would have been better to have been advised the authors of some other short stories that maybe take that bit out or change that bit. The editing does seem to be a little bit missing at times, and that's the kind of thing you'd expect the editor to say, hang on, we've got a clash of names here, but actually it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't. So probably fits better here than it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think Wolf in Ignorant Armies also turns into a sort of wolf man. So
what do you call the other one?
Yeah, because I suppose lion or something like that's probably not going to be quite as. It doesn't really make sense, but. Yeah,
I mean, at that stage, there wouldn't have been a Lupercal, but that would have spoiled horrors a little bit later.
But yeah, so we've got Wolf taking Konrad into Kislev, and we get some interesting descriptions of Kislev and I think Erengrad, and we get to see a little bit more of that sort of corner of the Warhammer world. I quite liked that. It was very brief, and this is where there's the first of a couple of time jumps. The journey isn't really described. We sort of go from we're in the Empire to we've now arrived in Kislev. I still liked it. It still gave me a feeling of the size and the sort of breadth of the Empire and the old world and how long it takes to get from one place to another. I guess we just weren't interested in finding out.
It's almost zooming out on the map in Indiana Jones style.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, very pulpy. Yeah,
and that would work. That's fine. It's just kind of we need to get from point A to point B. And we'll skip a bit.
Whilst they're there, Konrad gets attacked by a couple of hand-to-hand combatants. We get the sense that they've sort of trained, they've sort of got exotic skills from somewhere else in the old world, and we don't know why they attack Konrad, whether or not they're just thieves looking to make a quick killing.
It's hard to tell, isn't it? It could be part of the story. It may just be a way of showing that he's increasing in his skills and that he can fight, and that he is a warrior or a growing warrior of note, so that later on in the story and in future books, if he's fighting bigger, stronger warriors, it doesn't seem too strange. So it could just be as simple as
Potentially,
that.
yeah. But we'd also
But,
seen when Wolf asked to see the village earlier on before they left the Empire. There's a couple of stray beastmen who come flying out of the woods, and they immediately try and attack Konrad as well. And Wolf makes a comment of like,
winged beastmen, almost
yeah, they're winged
harpy-like, kind of,
beastmen, yeah. And Konrad has to fight them off, and Wolf basically says they seem to have a thing for you. Whatever these guys are, whatever this bad force is, it's drawn to Konrad. So part of me thinks that this is more of that. Yeah,
they're avoiding Wolf is the other.
Exactly. Yeah,
it could be that Wolf maybe isn't who he says he is, or something, or maybe he's
potentially, yeah, or they're scared of Wolf because he's obviously a great fighter. It could be something like that, but there's definitely
they're just not dog people.
There's another odd moment actually when they are at the village where Wolf hears a description of this bronze knight, potentially a chaos warrior, chaos knight, who'd come to the village to reconnoiter it before the chaos attack, and he just almost instantly is able to say, "Oh, that's my twin brother who may or may not be dead and may or may not have special powers." It was just a very sudden revelation. I think if there was one thing that drew me out of the story, that one was probably the biggest sort of clunker, because it was just so convenient. Now, we can talk about how fate may have played a hand, or Sigmar or something else may have played a hand in bringing Konrad and Wolf together, and that is the reason they go on this journey together as a sort of mentor and mentee. But that particular bit of information seemed so easy to come by and so freely given. It didn't feel that organic to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it probably needs to be told, but then maybe it would have been another way of doing it. Well, I suppose we won't know until we get there, and we don't know whether Wolf, what happens to Wolf now, because he's still recovering from his wounds as we leave him. And if Wolf was with Konrad and the first time they encounter, I'm sure they will encounter this night. It would be interesting at that point for Wolf to sort of hello brother kind of thing, and Konrad to do that what but that's maybe how it happened in a film. But yeah, we've already been told that. But again, it's another thread without a payoff, I suppose.
Very, very much so. Yeah, very much so. And there's a sort of, I mean, once we get to Kislev, we kind of then have a very late montage of learning. So you get this training montage where in Kislev there is a mine, and Wolf has been able to arrange for himself to become the sort of head of this mine, and he brings together this mercenary band to defend it from all of the chaos attacks. And each of those people who are there are able to give Konrad a different skill, and it kind of continues the aspirational sort of nature of the story. Like you were saying before, about this is very much a book written for the 14-year-old boy who sort of imagines himself suddenly in the Warhammer world. And yes, he gets this sort of doomed romance, and then he gets to go on a quest and an adventure. Then he learns every form of combat, and he becomes an expert in all of them. And you sort of get
this weird mix of the training scenes in Conan, training scenes in any 80s martial arts movie.
Yes, yeah.
And a Wolfrup character who's dungeon master puts him into some fake situations to level him up, ready for the next adventure, because he's not got many skills. So they concoct some really strange kind of easy encounter where we hang out with some NPCs that train you how to do things and level you up all in a short period of time. It wasn't my favorite part. It did feel very much, well, we've got to give him some skills and make him into a warrior. So let's just do this kind of. Yeah, but it felt very 80s film, I suppose. You can imagine them hanging out in the bars up in the frozen Kislev and practicing knife fighting and bows and swords and stuff. And you imagine playing cards and hands on table with knives and all that kind of manly man stuff going on. And then he had a woman as well, didn't he? And which is that. And I must admit, when I read the line when he was leaving her, and that was the first time we met her, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And because it was quite late at that point, I was getting towards the end of the book. I did think, hang on a minute, well, did I skip a page where he met this love interest? Because all you see with this love interest is him leaving her bed, essentially, isn't it? Really. And when you do that, if it was in a film, she probably wouldn't have had a name. I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's the way it's done, isn't it? He climbs out of the sheets and leaves the naked woman underneath the sheets asleep, kind of thing. But it felt like in those couple of lines, what was her name?
I think it was Kristen, yeah. Because I also thought, was that the name of Felix's love interest from the?
It's Kirsten.
Yeah, and that. So I went back and checked. It is close. It is close, especially after the double wolf that we've already encountered. It seems quite close. But yes,
there's not that many names. There's just not that many names.
It is an odd one because it almost has that sort of James Bondian kind of feel of, yes, this is going to almost, maybe it raises the stakes. Maybe it shows how Konrad is just the sort of, this great man and this great lover and women.
Probably what it is just showing that coming to age now.
And it serves a purpose, but it did feel a little bit odd. It didn't feel like it quite had as much lead in.
As I said, I genuinely thought I've missed something here because the way he mentions her name 2 or 3 times on the page, and it gives some sort of it was almost an idea of history there. And all it needed was a couple of lines ahead of the fight montage, training montage, maybe to say that he'd met someone there and a little bit more about the passage of time there, that he'd settled almost into it. And maybe that was the attempt, and it just didn't quite pay off. I mean, just on that montage of different trainers, there were a couple that really stood out to me as interesting. One was that there's a Bretonnian brawler who teaches sort of street fighting and has no honor whatsoever, and it's explicitly said that he's Bretonnian and he's got no idea about honor. And then that's followed by a knight from Albion who's the opposite, who's got all of the honor in the world. And it just really is interesting because at this point in time, this is when Bretonnia doesn't have the sort of chivalric version of the Bretonnian knight and everything that we now know as Bretonnia. It was an earlier version where it's a bit more decadent, a little bit more grubby and not quite as nice. I just thought this was a very interesting example of that. Bretonnia's not about honor. And Albion, which we will later will also be retcons to be a very different place. Yeah. In this version is knights and honor and all that sort of stuff. So I thought that was an interesting point. Is that a typical English kind of romantic view of the almost Arthurian Albion, which maybe would have been at that point rather than the Arthurian and Bretonnian that we end up with? Those kind of things get molded together, and the almost the 100 Years War view of France, of the no honor, up to the bone, kind of that kind of. I wonder whether that was a little bit of that came into the writing there.
I think it might have. Yeah. But here's a question for you then, Stu. So we get then all of a sudden, and this is another one of these things where there's just a sudden sort of structural change. Now we're going on a quest. And the reason we're going on a quest is because Wolf, despite running this mine successfully for 5 years, hasn't actually made any money from it. And he's decided that now he and this random dwarf who's just been introduced, they are going to take Konrad, and together they're going to go and find a lost dwarven shrine in the mountains outside Kislev, which is going to be full of gold. I wondered, because we're given explicit information from Konrad, there's only a couple of days left until his 5-year agreement with Wolf is up, and he'll be a free man, and he'll go off and do whatever he wants. So my theory is that knowing this, Wolf has concocted, sort of out of nowhere, a ridiculous quest because it's a good excuse for him and Konrad to stay together. Now, there's not a lot of information to support that, but I kind of feel that's a nicer reading than just a sudden swerve out of nowhere.
I hope so, because if it is genuinely a treasure quest, it's not in keeping with the rest of the story and almost feels like I've got to end this in X amount of words and a chapter. So let's come up with this. And I hope that's not the case, because I didn't enjoy that part of the book anywhere near as much as I did the first sort of 2/3, 3/4 of it. I hope that's the case. Yeah, I hope we find early on in the next book that that's the case. Almost that there's another reason beyond that for going there. Maybe maybe it's an artifact or something or other that of importance, and I hope that there's more to that story, rather than just a tool to kind of get to where we did at the end of the book with a slightly exposed, maybe wolf, literally exposed as a wolf, and Konrad seeing the night through the reflections in the glass, which is all a bit weird.
It's all very convenient, and I think it's so sudden. It's such a sudden quest, and like you say, it feels like, okay, there's probably only 20 or 30 pages left, and now we're going on a quest. There's no way this quest is going to be resolved before the end of the book. This must be setting up what's going to happen next. But actually, no, we get right the way to the end. They succeed. They complete that particular dungeon dive. Obviously, a little bit worse for wear, but it really does power through it. Yeah, but very quick.
Yeah, it felt a little bit more, that final chapter or two felt a little bit more like the kind of the pace and the quality of some of the shorter stories that we've read, in terms of,
it could have almost been a short story. You could have just taken that bit from the tavern when they agree to go to the temple. That could have just been a single short story in one of the other anthologies.
Yes, well, it was the most D&D kind of a week-long D&D campaign, maybe, or a couple of evenings D&D campaign, rather than the rest of the book that felt like a story. So you definitely didn't enjoy the end so much, but the rest of it was good enough that I'm still really excited to find out, and I'm hoping that we get back on track, and that's not the taster of what's to come, because it was a little bit strange.
It was strange, and even though it was super sudden, there were still some things in it that I really liked, and that actually did give me quite a high coming out of the book. So that sort of did fill me with sort of excitement about where we go next. So one, there's been a bit of an oddity with this second sight power that Konrad's got, where it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. He is left behind, and he suddenly has a vision out of nowhere for the first time, it seems, of other people in danger, which he's never been able to do before. And it's Wolf and the dwarf and Villa, and they are down in this temple and they're under attack, and he's going to have to go and sort of step in and save the day. And when he gets there, he's suddenly imbued. He encounters hundreds of goblins, and he's suddenly imbued with a sort of extra sort of magical power out of nowhere. He's swinging his axe, but it feels like it's a warhammer. He's been reading the life of Sigmar, so the little book of Sigmar's doings and deeds that exists within the Warhammer world, which they later published from Black Library, which is great fun.
I love all that stuff because it makes it feel very Warhammer. The references, and there's quite a few references to Sigmar, which you don't see in some of the other stories.
And you kind of get this. It's almost this, as he's battling through all of these goblins. Is he possessed by Sigmar, or is he just, it's Sigmar channeling his power through Konrad in the same way as we saw at the end of Drachenfels, where Sigmar's power was channeled through Detlef? Is that what's happening? And I quite liked that. And there was quite well described. There was a very cool action movie, sort of John Wick style moment where he's got one arrow, and before the start of the fight, he fires the arrow and then grabs his axe and gets stuck in before the arrow even hits its target. And it's just a very cool, super action hero moment. That's great.
Yeah. Very, very Legolas in Jackson's Lord of the Rings kind of thing as well. Yeah. I think it could go either way with that, and I think it works either way as well. Just whether it's just him in battle lust in that moment, inspired by stories he read, or whether there is something, and maybe it's cool if we don't find out, so we can just we don't need to know. Almost, it's just nice that he's had that thought. There's when you get around to reading some of the Gotrek and Felix novels, Felix has a magical sword that sometimes in combat, just it almost leads him, gives him extra confidence and strength and things, and he doesn't realize till afterwards that some of the things he was doing may have been the sword more than him, and the way he thinks about it. And it's quite interesting. So maybe, I mean, where did he get that axe? What is it? Well,
Yeah.
So there's lots of things it could be, but it may be nothing more than just inspired by, which is cool though.
It could be, and you kind of get the sense of, because he's just been reading about the Battle of Blackfire Pass and Sigmar's triumph there. So is he sort of imagining himself in that fight, and that's just bringing those memories from reading it? Whatever it is, he manages to take out all of these goblins. He saves Wolf, who was being sacrificed as part of a ritual. Obviously, he then sees Wolf in his sort of wolfy form. If you're paying very close attention, you can see that that's the case. And then there's this oddness, as you mentioned, around Anvila the dwarf, who, it also occurs to me, there's a character in Zaragars called whose name is like Duke de Anvila or something very similar to Anvila the dwarf. So another name that's very similar. But this dwarf, the female dwarf engineer, she has cleaned up some sort of area above and exposed this sort of large glass lens in the top of the temple that allows light to pass through the mountains. And then through the sort of refracted light and reflections, all of a sudden Konrad can see the very same Bronze Knight from his village 5 years earlier, just riding along the plains. And Anvila's like, oh no, he's not riding towards us, he's riding away. And Konrad just goes, oh, I've got to go and chase him. And he does. He runs off to chase him. And that's where the story ends. So again,
it's odd, isn't it?
It's very odd. It's very convenient. Oh, there's the knight. I guess I'm going to go and sort of have my next
the sudden image of the knight. It's like seeing the postman disappearing away from your Ring doorbell when you've it's like, oh, I need to chase after him. He was a little bit odd, but I'm glad that there was some payback, some callback to that. Otherwise, it would have been even stranger end. But
and the way I can forgive it is if you do take it as, well, this is a fated character. So I mean, again, one of my patrons in the live stream discussion said that so this was Ryan, was saying that all of these monsters and all of these different chaos characters are trying to kill Konrad specifically because he's one of these important fated figures who can hold back the machinations of chaos. I mean, we see it again and again in the Warhammer world. We see it with Valton. We've seen it with Sigmar himself. Certain characters who will be important to stem the tide. If Konrad is one of those, then the fact that Wolf is just there at the right moment, the fact that Wolf has this relationship with the evil knight, the fact that Alyssa gave him the bow and arrow to help him train, and the fact that the Bronze Knight is just there at that right moment is all Sigmar pulling strings and sort of making sure that things are going to happen to put Konrad in the right place with the right skills at the right time. So I can kind of forgive it on that basis.
I don't mind the end. I think the issue, it's not an issue I have with it, that's the wrong word, but I think where you have an ending like that as part of a trilogy or something, it's normally the middle story where you have that kind of non-traditional, the heroes win end. So you look at Star Wars, it's more of an Empire Strikes Back ending, knowing that your story is carrying on, than it was for a New Hope style ending, where while it almost could be a standalone. And you find that a lot of trilogies, the stories themselves, at least the first story, has a climax and a big ending anyway, but there may be some threads left open that that's continue and expand the story. This felt very much like it as a book on its own. It's just left it needs the other books to finish off the story. You're left with nothing was resolved at all. Normally something's resolved. Yeah. But it didn't feel like there was anything resolved.
Nothing resolved.
And I don't know how they would do that. I mean, one way of doing that would have been building towards the importance of defending Kislev and a bigger battle that made you feel like he's done something heroic at the end. And maybe as part of that bigger battle, there would have been a connection to some other people attacking the village originally. So you've helped to win the main battle and maybe resolve one of those. Maybe Skullface would have died or something. I'm not suggesting that's a bad way to do the story, but in terms of how you would
or a
round off this story.
Yeah,
so someone you'd come across before, whether it's Skullface or the what we're going to assume is a Chaos Warrior in the bronze armor, that kind of thing. You've resolved one of the many tracks, but none of them are resolved at all.
No.
As I said, it feels a bit more like the way you'd leave a middle story where it doesn't matter because you're already hooked in at that point, and you could trust the reader's going to move on to number 3 because they love number 1.
Yeah.
They've enjoyed number 2. The bridging, it feels like a bit of an end to a bridging story, but
yeah, I agree.
Interesting.
I agree, it's not the most satisfying end to a book.
No, it felt like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to happen because I could see how little pages I had left. And I think this isn't going to resolve. But
yeah, and again, actually, a great quote from the Patreon discussion with Tommy, who said that the book has an ending, but it doesn't feel like it's a part of the story. And I think that's a real good point because it just is. It's almost cut and pasted in from somewhere else to just we don't have any more pages left for this installment, so we need to end. We're gonna have to rush something to get us to where we want to be for the start of the next one. So
I wonder whether when we get to it, we'll find that maybe that's happened. Maybe that wasn't the way the book was going to end.
Yeah.
And they've decided to kind of leave an early cliffhanger. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe it's almost 2 books that they turn into a trilogy.
Potentially. And actually, the sort of counterpoint, I suppose, to the example would be if it's not Star Wars, it is the Lord of the Rings movies. So we did have our Ammon Hen because we've had the battle with the goblins and the cool action scene. And then we've got the breaking of the Fellowship where everyone just sort of runs off in different directions almost at random. And that's what Konrad is just running off for his next part of the quest. So you could sort of compare it to that. I guess the difference is that the Lord of the Rings, that the first Fellowship of the Rings movie is a satisfying movie to watch on its own. Maybe this book lacks a certain amount of that satisfaction.
And you know what the goal is as well. It's very clear.
That's true.
You know what the goal of is to destroy this ring. Whereas we don't really know what the goal is, which are the many threads that were put there that aren't. Nothing feels like the main arc of the story apart from Konrad's life. The rest of it are all things that are clearly important, but we don't know which is the most important.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, and if it of the many mysteries that we've got, if you were to dwell on just one of them, and for example, that vision of the future Konrad, if that had come back. And at the end of the book, Konrad encounters another vision that expands on it a little bit, that explains he has got some important fate. He will be the one that brings balance to the Force, or whatever it is. Yes, that would give us a little bit something more to cling on to going into part 2, other than just I'm going to chase this random guy.
Maybe the vision he should have had was saving Wolf in wolf form or something, but anything that would have been a big callback to make you go, whoa, that's it, I remember. But it wasn't quite that.
And I say it's not satisfying, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed the read overall. And there's one more point about the end sort of final mini act that I did absolutely love, and that's the final words in the book. So Wolf, having witnessed Konrad be imbued with all of this power and kill all of these goblins, and then he knows the Bronze Knight is out there, and Konrad's going to go off and chase him, and he sort of mutters something in he's just been saved from the ritual, so he's not really there, and he's sort of struggling. He mutters something, and Konrad has to go in and listen again, and he says the word again, and as Konrad's leaving, he thinks to himself, oh, I need to bear in mind Wolf's warning, and the warning was just one word: chaos. And that's the first time in the book, I think, that we've seen the word chaos. And we obviously, we know what chaos is. We've seen decades worth of chaos stuff, but these characters haven't necessarily. Konrad certainly not. And the reader might not have either. So when you're talking about renegades, because they use the term renegades quite a lot.
They deliberately don't use the word chaos.
Exactly,
Each, especially the earlier chapters, beginning of each chapter, and it's italicized in the copy I have. There's these descriptions of the horde slowly moving towards, and you've got that almost told in a narrator's voice before you move to Konrad. And we haven't discussed that, have we? But that the beginning of a lot of the early chapters is this idea of this impending doom, this growth of hordes of renegades moving towards civilization, I suppose, the threat
Yeah.
And that's there. And yeah, you're right. I think they deliberately not used the word chaos until that point. So
Yeah. There's a real
um,
weight to it. It
mm,
feels scary. And I think that's why I sort of left off really enjoying it overall, was because it brought the threat back to chaos, because they're
yeah,
so sort of neutered now because we've explored them so much and we've seen every facet of chaos in all of the books and fiction and games. Whereas this book treats them as the thing that they are, which is truly terrifying. So
hmm
that worked really well. And you're right, we didn't talk about that sort of the initial intro sections. One of the things I liked about that was that each one moved on slightly. So it became
hmm
you got a little bit of what you'd seen in the previous chapter and then a little bit of new text. And that kind of had
yes,
this sort of tidal flow to me that kind of felt like you were moving towards the village. So with each extra chapter with more words, it
hmm
was like you moved back and then you moved further forward towards the village. And that's the march of
very
chaos.
cinematic, isn't it? You
Yeah.
can imagine scenes of kind of hordes and drum beats and then it cuts to the more serene normal life bit, so
Mm.
you know there's that impending doom the whole time. And yeah, I think that's all deliberate and probably built up to this.
Yeah, very much so. And then the other thing that I liked about that chaos name drop at the end is there's a, for me, and I don't know if you felt the same, there's a little bit of ambiguity for what Wolf meant. So he said he's like it's a bit of a warning about chaos. Is he saying, "Oh, the Bronze Knight, my brother, he's chaos. So there's my warning: is just be careful, he's chaos." Or is he saying that I just witnessed you be imbued with magical godlike powers? Maybe you're
Yes.
chaos, Konrad, actually, and you shouldn't be embracing these powers. So
Yeah.
to me, there was
Or
just enough
even
there.
what's wrong with me? That's
Yeah,
chaos.
am I chaos? Am I the chaos? Yeah, absolutely. So there's all of these different.
All of the above. Because
Yes, yeah. In the Warhammer world, for definite, it's all it's all of the above. But yeah, I think that left me on a real high of just like, this is fun. I like this.
Mm,
This is chaos is scary, but it's also ambiguous, and I'm looking forward to seeing where things go next.
agreed. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've talked before about whether or not the books feel kind of Warhammery. Did this one feel Warhammery to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Some of the others that didn't feel Warhammery didn't even feel Warhammery from my old third edition and Woofrup introduction to Warhammer, whereas this feels solidly in that era.
Hmm.
And also enough kind of modern connections as well that you can imagine it as written as a modern story, I suppose, as well. So yeah, absolutely Warhammer.
Yeah, for me too.
It,
Yeah.
it felt like David Ferring had a grasp of what empire meant and that Sigmar was important, and that you had to mention these things because they are at the essence of what Warhammer is. And if you don't mention them and you don't link it to the story and you're a little bit more ambiguous about it, and then you're just writing generic fantasy. And then he got that, I think.
Yeah.
So they've clearly all read Woofrup, haven't they? But he got it and picked out the parts of his brief. He picked up on the important factors and important parts, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's the places and the way they're described, the villages, the towns, Kislev, even the mine. It feels like locations you could visit in Wolfrup, and the characters they're sort of, most of them are shades of grey, and there's that sort of Warhammer sort of feel to a lot of those as well. And then yeah, the descriptions of beastmen and the chaos creatures that we see, they all felt very of the world as well. So yeah, it definitely worked for me.
Absolutely.
So the final thing then, Stu, is thumbs up or thumbs down on this book.
Oh, solid thumbs up. Solid.
Yeah.
Good. It's good.
Yeah, I agree. Thumbs up for me. I think this was a good win. Yeah, I think there's obviously some stuff that's a little bit structurally strange, a bit sudden. Maybe it's not the smoothest intro into a trilogy, but the content and the mysteries that have been laid down for the rest of the trilogy definitely worked and definitely were compelling
Yeah.
enough to keep me involved. And
yeah, I think I'm hoping it will be fine. And those last 3 or 4 chapters that seem to be a little bit messy and a bit condensed compared to the rest of it, will sort of pale into insignificance, and it will be great. Because the first 2/3 of the book were just really good, really, really, really good, and the last part was just good. But the first parts were good enough to really kind of carry it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't know what to expect going in, because I knew this was kind of the sort of YA style novel, a young adult novel for Games Workshop. It's the one that's kind of reflected on the most in that way, I think. When people look back, they sort of say, yeah, it was great when I was 10 or 11 or 12 or 14 or 15. I didn't think, well, I wasn't sure it was going to grab me, but it did, and I enjoyed it. So I don't know if that just means that I'm a 14-year-old still mentally, but it definitely worked for me.
Maybe, but I still think they can be successful stories.
Yeah, they absolutely can.
Even stories that are aimed at those things can still be written in a way that's enjoyable to read. You see that. Well, how many adults read Harry Potter?
Sure.
And I know those they evolved to meet that adult audience. I'm reading Percy Jackson to my son at the moment, and it's a joy to read. They've written very nicely, and it's good. So I don't think necessarily something aimed at that kind of young adult or more teen market, I suppose, necessarily means that the story isn't going to be worth telling or enjoyable for adults.
No,
it just means that the overall themes might not be as complex, maybe.
Yeah, you're quite right. I think that was probably a bit of snobbishness on me going in, but I've been very happily proven wrong for having any kind of doubts. But we've got the next book coming up is actually the second part of the first trilogy in the GW book series. So we're returning to Orfeo and the tales of this minstrel, because we're going to be reading Plague Demon next. So we've read Zaragoz. It was an interesting read, I would say. Yeah. It was certainly not the best so far. No. But there was some. I found some things to like in it. It was a bit messy. But what are you excited about Plague Demon?
I'm excited about the title, and I'm hoping that reflects in the story more. That it's the title's very Warhammer, obviously. So I'm hoping that the story kind of feels a little bit more Warhammer than the last offering. I'm excited more from an interest point of view, really. Just thinking, well, where does it go? Because it was odd, the last story.
Yeah.
And you'd hope that maybe that there's a little bit more. It grow as it grows, that it grows more into the worlds that we recognise. And if it does, and I think, I don't know, I've not looked into it at all. I've not done anything with it. I've not read the blurb. I didn't want to colour anything at all. I didn't want to colour my opinion of it. So if it maybe moves into more recognisable parts, maybe it's in the old world that we recognise more, it might help. Because it wasn't always the writing. Some of it was just the choices around setting and the way that was handled, I think was more problematic. But
yeah,
we will see.
I'm not going to hold my breath, but I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm not going to hold my breath about it. I'm going to see how it goes. But yeah, so that's coming up next. We'll be back in a month's time, and we'll be talking about Plague Demon. So great stuff. Right. Thank you, Stu. People can find you on YouTube, Miniature Realms. They can find you on all of the social medias.
Everything at Miniature Realms, basically.
At Miniature Realms.
YouTube's the main one, but yeah.
And you've got a Discord and a Patreon as well. And I'll put the links to those in the description below.
Thank you very much.
And you can also find me. I'm at Jordan Sorcery on everything as well. And I've got all my links down in the description too. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.